The celestial lounge of the Grand Majestic Hotel was not a room. It was a statement. It was a declaration of wealth so profound it had transcended mere comfort and entered the realm of artifice. The floors were polished marble, vast and white, streaked with veins of gray that gleamed like frozen rivers under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. Each chandelier was a captive galaxy, dripping with light that never seemed to truly warm the cavernous space. The air itself felt curated, scented with the faint, expensive perfume of aged leather from the high-backed armchairs and the even fainter, ghost-like aroma of imported cigars smoked hours before. It was a silence money bought, a hush that absorbed the trivialities of the outside world. In the center of this opulent tundra sat Alistair Blackwood. He was less a man and more a monument to his own success. His suit was a shade of charcoal so dark it seemed to drink the light, tailored with a precision that suggested it was not sewn, but forged. On his wrist, a Swiss watch did not simply tell time. It displayed the intricate dance of celestial bodies in a miniature, diamond-studded universe. It was a vulgar display of power, and he knew it. He enjoyed it. His face was a mask of bored indifference, his eyes the color of a winter sky, sweeping over the other patrons with a dismissive gaze. He saw them not as people, but as assets or liabilities, their worth calculated in a cold, internal ledger. Alistair took a slow sip of his whiskey. The liquid was older than most of the people in the room, and cost more than their monthly salaries. It burned a pleasant, familiar trail down his throat, but the warmth never reached his core. An emptiness, vast and glacial, resided there. He had conquered the world, bent it to his will, bought and sold pieces of it like a child playing with blocks. Yet, the victory felt hollow, the silence of his penthouse apartment each night a roaring accusation of his solitude. He had built an empire of ice, and he was its lonely, shivering king. His smile, when it rarely appeared, was as thin as a paper cut and just as unsettling. Across the expansive lounge, a different kind of man moved with a different kind of silence. Leo Vance was a ghost in this world of gilded cages. His uniform was a simple gray, worn at the cuffs and collar but immaculately clean. He pushed a polished brass cart, collecting empty glasses and discarded napkins with a quiet efficiency designed to make him invisible. His movements were fluid and graceful, a stark contrast to the stiff, self-conscious postures of the wealthy guests. His hands, though calloused from years of labor, were long and elegant, the hands of an artist, not a janitor. Leo kept his eyes downcast, a habit born of necessity. To meet the gaze of men like Alistair Blackwood was to invite a scrutiny you could not afford. He was not ashamed of his work. It was honest, and it paid for the small apartment he shared with his mother, and more importantly, for the medicine that kept the flickering candle of her life from being extinguished by the harsh winds of illness. Inside him, beneath the quiet deference, was a core of unyielding dignity. He carried a universe of his own, not on his wrist, but in his heart. It was a world of memory, of love, and of a profound, aching loss that had led him here, to this place where he polished the glasses from which his own shattered dreams were toasted. His gaze, despite his best efforts, drifted to the centerpiece of the room. It was a concert grand piano, a magnificent Steinway whose ebony finish shone like a pool of black water. It sat on a low dais, a silent god awaiting a worthy supplicant. Leo's fingers twitched at his side, an involuntary memory of flight and passion. He could almost feel the cool, smooth resistance of the ivory keys beneath his touch, hear the rich, resonant chords that once flowed from him as easily as breath. That life was a lifetime ago, buried under the rubble of tragedy. Now the piano was just another beautiful, untouchable thing in a world that no longer belonged to him. Alistair Blackwood noticed the janitor's stare. He saw the flicker of longing in the man's eyes as they rested on the piano. The sight irritated him, a tiny, insignificant detail that was nonetheless out of place in his perfectly controlled world. A janitor, a creature of mops and dustbins, looking at a masterpiece of an instrument with such familiarity. It was an affront. It was like a rat admiring a crown. A cruel, bored idea began to form in the frozen landscape of Alistair's mind. He wanted to make a point. He wanted to demonstrate the unbridgeable chasm that separated his world from this man's. He wanted to make the silence of the room his accomplice. Leo felt a prickling on his neck, the distinct and unpleasant sensation of being watched. He pulled his gaze away from the piano and saw Alistair Blackwood looking directly at him. The billionaire's eyes were chips of ice, holding a glint of predatory amusement. He gestured with a single imperious finger. "You, the help, over here." The voice was ice wrapped in velvet. It cut through the low murmur of the lounge, and heads began to turn. Conversations faltered. The wealthy patrons, like animals sensing a shift in the atmosphere, turned their attention to the impending spectacle. Leo's heart gave a slow, heavy thud. He hated this part of the job, being summoned like a dog, becoming the momentary entertainment for the bored and powerful. He pushed his cart to the side and walked towards Alistair's table, his worn shoes making no sound on the vast marble floor. "Sir?" Leo's voice was quiet, respectful, a shield he had learned to use. Alistair leaned back, a smirk playing on his thin lips. He looked Leo up and down, his gaze lingering on the worn uniform, the calloused hands. It was a performance, and the entire lounge was his stage. "I saw you looking at the piano," Alistair said, his voice carrying so that everyone could hear. "Do you enjoy music?" "Yes, sir, very much," Leo replied, his gaze fixed on a point just past Alistair's shoulder. "Do you play?" The question was a trap, laced with condescension. Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I used to, a long time ago." Alistair chuckled, a dry, rustling sound devoid of warmth. "Of course you did. I'm sure you were the star of your local pub." A ripple of sycophantic laughter spread through the nearby tables. The audience was warming up. Leo said nothing. He simply stood there, a pillar of quiet endurance. This infuriated Alistair more than any retort could have. He wanted to see a crack in that placid facade. He wanted to see the man break. His eyes narrowed. He remembered a fragment of a conversation he had overheard earlier, a hushed, worried phone call the janitor had made near the service entrance. Something about a hospital, a mother, a doctor's report. An idea far crueler and more precise than his first took shape. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, yet still public whisper. "I have a proposition for you. A little game." He pulled out a thick, leather-bound wallet. From it, he produced a checkbook and a pen made of gleaming silver. The pen looked more valuable than anything Leo owned. "I understand you have a situation. A sick mother, I believe?" Leo's blood ran cold. The quiet shield of his anonymity was being publicly torn away. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, dissecting his poverty, his private pain. He gave a stiff, barely perceptible nod. Alistair's smile widened. It did not reach his eyes. "I am a generous man. I like to help the less fortunate. It's a hobby of mine." He uncapped the pen with a decisive click. "Here is my offer. I will write you a check right now for $100,000. A collective gasp rippled through the lounge. The sum was astronomical, a life-changing amount of money for someone like Leo. It was a figure of fantasy. "All you have to do," Alistair continued, savoring each word, "is abandon her." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. "Leave this hotel right now. Don't go to the hospital tonight. Don't visit her tomorrow. Don't ever see her again. Walk away. In exchange for your freedom from that burden, you get this." He waved the pen over the blank check. $100,000. A new life. Everything has a price, my friend. I'm just curious to find out the price of a son's love. Leo stared at Alistair Blackwood. For the first time, he met the man's gaze directly. In the billionaire's icy eyes, he saw not just cruelty, but a profound, cavernous emptiness. This wasn't about money. It was about proving a cynical, broken world-view. It was about a man who had lost his own soul, trying to prove that no one else had one either. The humiliation was a white-hot poker against Leo's skin. The faces of the other guests blurred into a gallery of grotesque masks, some shocked, some amused, all complicit. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her tired eyes, her gentle smile, the hand that had held his through every fever and every fear. Alistair waited, the pen poised. What's it to be? A dying woman's hand or a fortune? It seems like an easy choice to me. Something inside Leo, a cord that had been stretched taut for years, finally snapped. It was not a violent break, but a clean, silent severance from his fear. The quiet deference fell away from him like a discarded coat. His posture straightened. The janitor, the ghost, vanished. In his place stood a man. He did not answer Alistair. He did not even look at him anymore. Instead, he turned and walked towards the grand piano. Each step was deliberate, resonant. The crowd parted before him as if he were royalty. He ascended the low dais, his worn shoes making a soft, defiant sound on the polished wood. He ran a hand over the cool, gleaming ebony of the Steinway, a touch that was both a greeting and an apology to an old, lost friend. He sat down on the leather bench, his back perfectly straight. Alistair watched, his smirk faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What do you think you're doing? That instrument is worth more than your life." Leo ignored him. He lifted his hands, those calloused, elegant hands, and held them poised over the keys. The entire room held its breath. The silence was no longer Alistair's accomplice. It was Leo's. It was a canvas waiting for a master's stroke. Then he played. The first note was a single, crystalline sound of such sorrow and beauty that it seemed to hang in the air. A tear made of music. It was followed by a cascade of chords, a torrent of emotion that flooded the sterile, silent lounge. This was not the tinkling background music of a hotel bar. This was a symphony of a broken heart. The music was complex, ferocious, and tender all at once. It spoke of soaring joy and bottomless grief, of love found and love violently stolen away. It was the sound of a man who had stood at the peak of the world and been cast into the abyss. Leo's eyes were closed. He was no longer in the celestial lounge. He was back in a sunlit room with his wife, her laughter mingling with the melody. He was in a park, pushing his daughter on a swing, her small, joyful shrieks forming a counterpoint to the music in his head. He was at the side of a twisted wreck of metal, the melody shattering into a discordant scream of sirens and despair. He was in a quiet hospital room, the soft, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor the only percussion accompanying the lullaby he played in his memory for his sleeping mother. The music swelled, filling every corner of the vast room, washing over the stunned, silent guests. It stripped away their expensive clothes, their arrogant postures, their cynical worldviews. It exposed the raw, beating heart of shared humanity underneath. Women dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. Men who hadn't shown emotion in decades stared at the piano, their faces slack with awe and a forgotten sense of wonder. The music was a mirror, and in it, they saw their own hidden sorrows, their own unfulfilled dreams. Alistair Blackwood was frozen in his chair. The whiskey glass was suspended halfway to his lips. The music bypassed the icy walls he had built around his heart and struck at the core of his being. It was a language he had long forgotten, the language of feeling. Each note was an accusation, a judgment on the barren wasteland of his life. The $100,000 check lay on the table, a pathetic, meaningless piece of paper in the face of such profound, priceless beauty. He was seeing the world through the janitor's eyes, feeling it through his music, and the revelation was devastating. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. The king was a beggar, and the janitor was a god. The final notes of the piece hung in the air, shimmering, before fading into an absolute, reverent silence. Leo's hands fell from the keys. He sat for a moment, his head bowed, the echo of his life's story still ringing in his ears. The silence was broken by a single, sharp sound. A clap. It came from an older gentleman at the back of the room, Mr. Harrison, the owner of the Grand Majestic himself. He was on his feet, his face a mixture of shock and profound respect. His applause was followed by another, and then another, until the entire lounge erupted in a thunderous, spontaneous ovation. It was not polite applause. It was a desperate, cathartic roar of approval. A thank you for a gift they didn't know they needed. Leo slowly rose from the piano bench and turned to face the room. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply looked at them, his eyes clear and calm. He had given them his soul, and there was nothing left to do. His gaze finally settled on Alistair Blackwood. Alistair was still sitting, a statue of disbelief. The checkbook lay forgotten. His face, usually a carefully controlled mask, was a mess of conflicting emotions. Shock, confusion, and something that looked terrifyingly like shame. The janitor had not just refused his challenge, he had rendered it, and the entire worldview behind it, utterly insignificant. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. In the age of digital omnipresence, secrets had a shorter lifespan than a mayfly. A guest at a nearby table, a young tech entrepreneur with a popular social media presence, had recorded the entire exchange on his phone. From Alistair's cruel, contemptuous offer to the last, heartbreaking note of Leo's performance. He had uploaded it before the applause had even died down. The video spread like a digital wildfire. The title was devastatingly simple. Billionaire Alistair Blackwood tries to buy a man's soul. You won't believe what happens next. Within minutes, it had thousands of views. Within an hour, hundreds of thousands. By the time Leo had quietly retrieved his cleaning cart and slipped away to the hospital, the video was a global phenomenon. The janitor virtuoso was a hero. Alistair Blackwood was a villain from a Dickens novel, a modern-day Scrooge whose cruelty was now on display for the entire world to see. Alistair's phone began to vibrate on the table, a furious, insistent buzzing. The screen lit up with the name of his senior partner. He ignored it. It buzzed again. A board member, then again. His largest investor from Tokyo. His world, so carefully constructed from steel, glass, and intimidation, was beginning to fracture. The news tickers on the lounge's discreetly placed screens began to flash. Blackwood Industries' stock plummets amid viral video scandal. His reputation, the bedrock of his empire, was being vaporized in real time. As the crowd continued to buzz, a woman stepped forward from the throng. She was elegant, in her late 60s, with eyes that held a keen, intelligent light. She walked directly to the piano, her gaze fixed not on the instrument, but on the memory of the man who had just played it. Mr. Harrison, the hotel owner, recognized her immediately. "Evelyn," he said, his voice hushed with respect. "Evelyn Reed." The name silenced the room once more. Evelyn Reed was the most feared and respected music critic in the world. Her praise could launch a career into the stratosphere. Her criticism could end one overnight. She turned to the stunned audience, her voice clear and resonant. "For 15 years," she began, "the classical world has whispered a ghost story. A story of a young prodigy, a composer and pianist of once-in-a-generation talent who was poised to take the world by storm. His name was Leo Vance." A gasp went through the room. She was talking about the janitor. "He composed music that was not just technically brilliant, but emotionally devastating," Evelyn continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd and finally landing on the pale, frozen face of Alistair Blackwood. "He had a wife and a young daughter who were the sun and moon of his universe. Then, one night, they were killed in a hit-and-run accident, and Leo Vance vanished. He disappeared from the world, and his music disappeared with him. The piece he just played, I have only ever heard it described. It was his masterpiece, a requiem for his family. It is called Elegy for Elena." Her words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Alistair's crumbling facade. She had not only validated the janitor, she had crowned him a lost king. She had quantified the magnitude of Alistair's error in terms far more profound than money. He had not merely insulted a cleaner. He had desecrated a sacred artist and his sacred grief. Mr. Harrison walked over to Alistair's table. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes were hard as granite. He had known Leo for years, had hired him out of sympathy, sensing a deep well of sadness in the man, but never suspecting its source. "Mr. Blackwood," Harrison said, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of absolute authority in his own establishment. "Your cruelty has no place here. Your presence is an insult to the art we just witnessed and to the basic tenets of human decency." He gestured discreetly. 2 large, impeccably dressed security guards materialized at his side. They were not thuggish or aggressive. Their quiet, immovable presence was far more intimidating. "Please gather your things. You are no longer welcome at the Grand Majestic. Your membership is revoked, effective immediately." To be thrown out of the Grand Majestic was the ultimate social disgrace. It was a statement that your money, no matter how vast, could not purchase you a place among civilized people. Alistair looked around the room. Every face was turned towards him, no longer with awe or fear, but with a mixture of pity and contempt. He, Alistair Blackwood, the Titan, the king, was being escorted out like a common drunk. He stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. Stripped of his power and his audience's fear, he seemed smaller, a hollow man in an expensive suit. He walked out of the celestial lounge, the 2 guards flanking him, the sound of his own crashing world roaring in his ears. The last thing he saw was the empty piano bench, a silent, powerful throne that had exposed him for what he truly was. The following days were a blur of humiliation for Alistair. His face was everywhere, a meme for corporate arrogance. His company's board forced an emergency meeting where they demanded his resignation. Lifelong business partners refused his calls. The empire of ice was melting, and he was drowning in the cold, unforgiving waters of his own creation. But the public ruin was nothing compared to the private one. The music, Leo's music, was lodged in his soul. It played on a loop in his mind, a constant, beautiful, and agonizing reminder of his own spiritual bankruptcy. He had to find him. It was not a choice. It was a compulsion. After days of searching, he finally located Leo not at the hotel, but at the place he had so cruelly tried to make him abandon, St. Jude's Hospital, in a wing dedicated to long-term palliative care. Alistair entered the building, his expensive suit feeling like a costume in this world of quiet suffering and antiseptic smells. He found the room and paused at the door, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar emotion: fear. Inside, Leo was sitting by his mother's bedside, reading to her from a worn book of poetry. The old woman was frail, her breath a shallow whisper, but her eyes were fixed on her son with an expression of infinite love. The scene was so pure, so decent, it felt like a physical blow to Alistair. This was the love he had tried to put a price on. Leo looked up and saw him. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, weary sadness. He placed a bookmark in the book, gently squeezed his mother's hand, and stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him. The two men stood in the sterile corridor under the flat, humming fluorescent lights. For a long moment, neither spoke. Alistair began, but the words caught in his throat. Apologies were a foreign language to him. The music, it was the only answer I had, Leo said, his voice quiet. I need to understand, Alistair said, the words coming out in a raw, desperate rush. Why I am like this, why I did what I did. It was not an excuse, it was a plea. And so, in the quiet, sterile hallway of a hospital, the confession began. Alistair spoke of his own childhood, a landscape of poverty and desperation that was a world away from the celestial lounge. He spoke of his own mother, wasting away from an illness that a few $100s worth of medicine could have cured. He told of the day she died, and how he had stood by her graveside and made a vow. He would never be powerless again. He would conquer the world that had let her die. He would build a fortress of money so high that pain and loss could never touch him again. I succeeded, he said, his voice cracking. I built the fortress, but I built it around my own heart. I locked myself inside. My wife, Lily, she was the only one who had the key. She saw the scared little boy inside the monster. She tried to get me to see that I was just hurting myself. His gaze became distant, lost in a painful memory. We fought about it. The night she died, we had a terrible fight. I told her money was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that was real. She told me I was a ghost, haunting a vault full of gold. Leo listened, his expression unreadable. The story was tragic, but it was a common one. A man broken by poverty who becomes a monster in his quest for power. After she died, Alistair whispered, I sealed the last door. I decided she was wrong. Love was a weakness. Compassion was a liability. All that mattered was winning. When I saw you, looking at that piano with such love, and then I heard about your mother, it was like you were a living embodiment of everything I had forced myself to deny. I had to prove you were just like me, that your love had a price, because if it didn't, then my entire life has been a lie. A heavy silence fell between them. The confession was complete. Alistair Blackwood, the wounded tyrant, had finally shown his scars. Now it was Leo's turn. He took a slow breath, the antiseptic air feeling heavy in his lungs. "My life was music," he began, his voice soft but clear. "And my family, my wife Sarah and my daughter Elena. She was 6 years old. She had her mother's smile and my love for the piano. Her little fingers could already pick out a melody." He paused, the memory of physical pain. "We were driving home from a recital one night. We were happy. We were singing. Then, headlights. A car, driving impossibly fast. It hit us. I woke up in the hospital. They were gone." Leo's eyes met Alistair's. The driver never stopped. They found the car abandoned a few miles away. A rare model. A custom silver Bentley. The police said the driver was likely coming from a corporate gala that had just ended downtown. They were probably drunk. They were never found. Every drop of blood drained from Alistair Blackwood's face. A silver Bentley. A corporate gala. A terrible fight with Lily. Drinking, so much drinking to numb the pain of her words. He remembered leaving, furious. He remembered the blinding rage. The rest was a black, alcohol-soaked void. He had woken up in his own bed the next morning with a pounding headache and a deep, unexplained dent in the front fender of his car. His security chief had quietly had the car repaired and sold. No questions asked. At the time, he had been grateful for the discretion. Now the memory was a key turning in the lock of a dungeon he never knew he was in. The shared tragedy was not just a coincidence. It was a terrible, fated knot, tying their two lives together in a tapestry of pain. The man whose life Alistair had destroyed by accident, he had tried to destroy again, on purpose. "It was you," Leo said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a final devastating chord played in the symphony of their shared ruin. Alistair staggered back, his hand flying to his mouth as a choked, guttural sound escaped his throat. The foundation of his world, already fractured, now disintegrated into dust. He was not just a monster, he was the monster. The specific, nameless demon that had haunted Leo Vance's life for 15 years. The weight of it was unbearable. He fell to his knees on the cold linoleum floor of the hospital corridor, the great Alistair Blackwood, and he wept. They were not tears of self-pity, but tears of pure, soul-shattering horror. Stripped of his company, his reputation, and now his very identity, Alistair Blackwood was left with nothing but the rubble of his life and the terrible knowledge of his sins. For weeks, he was a ghost, wandering the city, haunted by the faces of the family he had destroyed and the man he had tormented. Ruin was a tempting abyss, a final, dark comfort. But the memory of Leo's music and the quiet dignity in his eyes even after the final revelation would not let him fall. It demanded something more. It demanded atonement. He made a choice. He would not wallow in the ruins. He would use the bricks of his fallen empire to build something new. He liquidated everything. The penthouse, the art collection, the private jet, the remaining stocks and bonds. He gathered the colossal fortune he had spent a lifetime accumulating, a mountain of gold built on a bedrock of pain, and he decided to give it all away. His lawyers were stunned. His financial advisors thought he had lost his mind. But Alistair was more lucid than he had ever been. He established a new charitable foundation, a massive endowment with a dual purpose. He called it the Lily and Elena Foundation, named for his wife, the woman who had tried to save his soul, and for Leo's daughter, the little girl whose life he had stolen. The Foundation's mission was simple and profound. First, it would provide free, world-class musical education to underprivileged children, ensuring that no talent would ever be silenced by poverty. Second, it would fully fund a new wing at St. Jude's Hospital, a state-of-the-art palliative care center, ensuring that no one would have to face the end of their life in anything less than comfort and dignity. It was a grand, public act of atonement, a direct and meaningful response to the two great tragedies that defined his life and Leo's. The final step was the hardest. He went to Leo, who was now spending every moment by his mother's side in her final days. He did not ask for forgiveness. He knew he had no right. He simply laid out the plans for the foundation, the legal documents, the transfer of every last penny of his fortune. "I want you to run it," Alistair said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its former arrogance. "I built an empire on the wrong values. You, Leo, your entire life is a testament to the right ones. You are the only person I trust to do this. To turn all of this poison, into medicine." He was not just offering Leo a job, he was seeding his entire legacy, his power, his name, into the hands of the man he had wronged more than any other. It was the ultimate act of surrender, a complete and total inversion of their first meeting. The protagonist was being handed the keys to the antagonist's kingdom, not through revenge, but through a quest for redemption. Leo looked at the mountain of paperwork, at the staggering sums of money, and then at the broken man before him. He saw the path of vengeance, easy and satisfying, but he also saw a different path, a harder one paved with grace. He thought of Elena, of her love for music. He thought of his mother, and her quiet, unshakable belief in the goodness of people. "I will do it," Leo said. "For them." 5 years passed. The grand opening of the Lily and Elena Conservatory of Music was a symphony of hope. The building was a masterpiece of architecture, all warm wood and soaring glass, designed to be a welcoming sanctuary, the antithesis of the cold, intimidating celestial lounge. Inside, it was filled not with the hushed whispers of the elite, but with the joyful noise of children. Children from every walk of life, holding violins, sitting at pianos, their faces alight with the thrill of creation. On the main stage, a youth orchestra was performing. Their conductor was Leo Vance. He was no longer the invisible janitor or the haunted prodigy. He was a mentor, a leader, his face calm and filled with a profound peace. He had not played a concert himself since that fateful night at the hotel, but he had found a deeper purpose, not in performing his own story, but in helping hundreds of children begin to write theirs. He had found a new family in the cacophony of their practice sessions, a new love in the shared joy of their triumphs. His own pain had not vanished, but it had been transformed into a wellspring of empathy that made him a legendary teacher. In the back of the auditorium, standing near the doors, was a man in a simple gray workshirt. He was arranging music stands and helping a small child with a stuck instrument case. It was Alistair Blackwood. He had kept nothing for himself but a small, simple apartment and a modest stipend. His days were spent here, at the conservatory, as a volunteer, a handyman, a ghost of a different sort, moving quietly in the background, his work a form of silent, daily prayer. He was humbled. He was changed. He rarely spoke, but he listened. He listened to the music, to the laughter of the children, and in those sounds, he was slowly, painstakingly, finding the humanity he had lost. He had discovered that his true worth was not in the billions he had commanded, but in the weight of a cello case he could carry for a child so she could play. As the orchestra reached its crescendo, Leo's eyes scanned the crowd. His gaze met Alistair's across the packed hall. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Acknowledgement, understanding, and a quiet, shared peace passed between them. The terrible, fated knot that had bound them in tragedy had finally been untangled and rewoven into a lifeline of second chances. Later that evening, as the last of the students and parents departed, Leo stood alone on the stage, looking out at the empty seats. The final speech of the night, given by a graduating student, replayed in his mind. The young woman, a scholarship recipient from the city's poorest neighborhood, had spoken of what the foundation meant. "It taught us," she had said, her voice thick with emotion, "that a person's value isn't measured by the bank account they have, but by the beauty they create and the kindness they share." That was the moral, the summation of it all. True wealth was not a fortress of ice to keep the world out, but a warm, open hall to invite it in. It was measured in the soaring notes of a child's violin, in the comfort given to the dying, in the courage to face the wreckage of the past and build a future. It was the understanding that the most valuable things in this world, love, dignity, forgiveness, and a second chance, are the only things that are truly beyond price. A single act of cruelty had almost destroyed 2 lives, but a single note of profound beauty had redeemed them, creating a lasting symphony of hope.